Hey everyone, Alex here from WarrenOffKeys.com, and if you've been paying attention to the gaming scene recently, you're probably familiar with the game called Among Us. In this Discord.js tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can make your own Discord bot that is going to help people play Among Us with friends in an easier way. Now unfortunately, as of recording this, Among Us does not have a public API, so we're kind of limited on what we can do, but we can use the Discord API to make it so we essentially can create voice channels for people who want to play the game and then delete the voice channels once they're done. It can also share the game code and the region that the user has created the game in, and this alone is going to make it a little easier for people who want to play. So that's what we're going to be covering in this video, and I'm going to be using the Commando framework in order to do this. If you're familiar with other command systems, then those should work just fine. I'm going to go inside my commands directory, and then I'm going to go into my games directory. You can navigate to wherever you want to put these commands. So the first step is to actually create a command, which is going to allow server owners that are using your bot to specify which category they want to create the voice channels in. So I'm going to make a new file. This will be called Among Us category.js. And within here, we have to first import Commando. So I could say const commando equals require discord.js-commando. And then we have to export a class, which is going to extend commando.command. So module.exports equals class. We can then call this something such as Among Us category command, and this is going to extend, using the extends keyword, commando.command. At this stage, we then have to create a constructor, and this is going to take in a client parameter. And within here, we then have to call the super method, which is going to essentially call the constructor of the command class. This is going to allow us to actually set up our command. And it's actually fairly simple. We just call super, we can pass in the client and then an object. And this object is going to contain some properties that are going to allow us to customize this, such as the name, which I am just going to say AUCat, which is going to be Among Us category. Obviously you can name yours whatever you want. We then have to specify the group, which is going to be games, because my commando groups are specified towards the exact file that they're in, or the exact folder rather. This is inside of games, and so I'm going to name my group games. And then we can add in the member name, which will also be AUCat. And then we can add in user permissions, which will be an array of strings. This is going to be the permissions that the user needs in order to actually run the command. For simplicity, I'm just going to add in administrator. That way people without the administrator permission can't run this. Last thing we need is a description, which will be specifies the category to create Among Us voice channels in. Obviously you can add whatever you want here. Now after that, we can go down and we can create a run method, which is going to be invoked whenever someone actually runs the command. So I can say run. This is going to be an asynchronous method with two parameters. The first one is going to be the message itself, so we can say message. The second one is going to be the arguments, so we can say args. Now the first thing I'm going to do is create a constant called category ID and set this equal to args. We could technically just rename this parameter to category ID, but that might confuse us in the future because arguments is always named this in our other commands, and also creating a category ID like this is just much more clear on what's going on. But now we want to make sure that we understand that category ID actually exists. So if not category ID, we can then complain to the user saying message.reply, please specify a category ID. We can then return. And now after this if statement, we want to actually save this to the database. So with that said, we have to create a schema. We can go inside the schemas folder, and I can make a new file. This is going to be called Among Us category schema.js. Within here, we have to first import mongoose. So const mongoose equals require mongoose. Now, if you've been following the series, you're aware that I like to create a constant, which is going to represent required strings. That way we don't have to actually repeat ourselves multiple times. So I can say const rec string for required string. We can then say type is string and required is true. Next, we can create our actual schema. So const Among Us category schema equals mongoose.schema with a capital S. We can then pass in an object, and here's where we can actually define the properties we want each document to contain. So I want the primary key of this object to be the guild ID, and because the primary key in MongoDB has to be _ID, it's not a very meaningful name, and so it's the perfect time to add in a comment, which will be guild ID. We can then set this to a required string, and the other property we need is also going to be the category ID, which will also be a required string. So these are the only two properties we need. We can then export this as a model. So module.exports equals mongoose.model. Where this takes in two parameters. The first one is going to be the name of our actual collection, which is going to be Among Us Categories. We can then also add in the name of our schema, which is going to be Among Us Category Schema, and then we can go ahead and save this file. Going back to our Among Us Category command, we have to first import this file so that we can use it. So I'm going to say const Among Us Category Schema equals require, and I'm using something called module aliases, so I can specify the name of the folder that I want to import from without an actual relative path. And if you're interested in this, I do have a video on this, which will be linked in the description. However, if you don't have access to this, you can just use a relative path to try and find your schemas folder and then access the schema you want. However, because I do have access to module aliases, I will be using those here. So instead of a relative path with a .. syntax, I can just say @schemas, and then it's going to then reference my schemas folder. So I can say await Among Us category schema.find one and update. This can be used to either insert or update data. So that way, if someone is setting the category for the first time, it'll go ahead and do that. But also if they've already set their category, we can then run this command again and it'll then update it. So the first thing we need is an object. This object is going to contain the actual keys in order to identify the object we want to modify. In this case, it is _ID, and this is just going to be the actual guild ID. So instead of repeating this multiple times, I'm just going to create a variable. So constant guild ID equals message.guild.id. Now at this stage, we can say _ID will equal guild ID, and then we can add in a second object as an argument here. And this will be what to either insert or update if an object contains this. So in the case that it doesn't exist, we want to actually insert something. And so we need to specify the same exact thing. That way that data is also present in the new object. But the main thing we want to do is when we update it, we want to pass in the category ID. That way we have access to the new category. Now, the last thing we need is another object, which will be upsert is true. This is essentially going to allow us to either insert or update the data depending on if it exists. Now we can go ahead and we can reply to the user, so message.reply. We can then say Among Us category set, and we can save this. I can open up my console and I can run the code with node index.js. I've made an Among Us category. I can go ahead and right click this and click on copy ID. And if you don't see this, you'll have to enable developer mode on your Discord account. I can then run !aucat for Among Us category, and then I can specify the ID. We can go ahead and go into Mongoose and we can click on refresh. We want to double check that this actually exists. We then see right here our ID, which is our guild ID, and our category ID, which is the ID of the category that I just created. And so this is saving to the database correctly. So now we're done with the category and the category schema. I just realized I actually misspelled this. Let me fix that real quick. I put in 2 C's for schema. So obviously if you did that, go ahead and fix that as well. And that means we also have to fix it when we imported it right here. There we go. So obviously 1 C in schema. And at that stage, we can go ahead and close these two. And now we need to create the last command, which is going to be the thing that will actually notify other people of the game existing, and then creating and eventually deleting the voice channel whenever people need to use it and whenever they're done using it. So inside the games, we can then make a new file. I'm going to just call this amongus.js. We then have to import commando. So const commando equals require discord.js-commando. And then we can go ahead and export a class. So module.exports equals class amongus command. And this is going to extend using the extends keyword commando.command. Now within here, we have to create a constructor. And this is going to give us a client, which we can then use to call the super function. This is all the same exact syntax and concepts as the last command. We could pass in the client and an object. And now we can actually go ahead and configure this. So the name is going to be AU for Among Us. Obviously, you can name this whatever you want. The group is going to be games. The member name will also be AU. And then the description will be makes it easier to play Among Us with friends. Now down here, we want a run method, which is going to be an asynchronous method, which gives us access to message and args. And now at this stage, we're going to want to gain access to both the region and the code for the actual Among Us game from the arguments. So the exact syntax for this will be AU, and then the region, and then the code. So this means that our argument should be an array, and by default, Commando is going to make it so our argument is a string, which will contain everything that the user typed aside from the actual command prefix. So in this case, it'll just be the region and the code in one single string. Obviously, we don't want that. So within our object here, we can actually say arg type is going to be multiple, and this is going to make it so our arguments is actually an array. We can then destructure that. I'm going to use array destructuring here. So we're going to get access to the region and the code from the actual arguments. Now that we have access to this, we want to go ahead and make sure that these values exist. So I can say if not region, message.reply, please specify a region, and then we can return. And then also if not code, we want to do the same thing. So message.reply, please specify the game code, and then we can also return. Now, of course, you can change these up. You can just make one error message. You could change the text. That's whatever you want to do. This is just an example. Now we want to go ahead and fetch the data for the category in this guild, and there's two reasons for that. One is we want to make sure that the category actually exists, and then two, we want to make sure that we know where to place this voice channel so it's not just floating somewhere outside of a category. So with that said, we have to import our schema. So I can say const among us category schema equals require at schemas / among us category schema. Now that I have this imported, we can scroll down and we can actually gain access to the document for this guild if it does exist. But this means we need access to the actual guild. So first I'm going to destructure some properties. We could say const. We need access to the channel, the guild, and the member from the actual message. And then after this, we can say const category document equals await, which is why our function is asynchronous. So await among us category schema dot find one. And within here, we have to pass an _ID, which is the primary key. And this is going to be guild.id. Now in this case, null will be returned if a category is not set. So we can say if not category ID, or category document rather, we can then complain to the user. So message.reply and among us category has not been set within this server. And then we can return. And now we need to go ahead and create the actual voice channel. There's a couple things to keep in mind here is that all of these channels are going to start with the name Among Us, and we actually need to use this whenever we're listening for when channels get deleted or whenever people leave channels to see if we should delete empty channels. Now if that doesn't make sense, don't worry, I'll be explaining that concept more later on in this video, but for now we need to scroll all the way up and we need to create a global constant here. This is going to be called channel name start, and this is just going to be simply Among Us. We'll be using this a few different places, and so eventually you'll understand why we're creating this here. We can then scroll back down, and we can say const channel name equals a template literal. We can add in the channel name start, and then a space, and then we also can add in quotes and the code that the user provided. We now want to go ahead and create the channel, so I can say const new channel. We can then say await guild.channels.create. We can pass in the channel name and then also an object. Whoops, that auto-completed a channel name start. Make sure it says channel name. And then an object which is going to contain some properties for this, such as the type being a voice channel. We can set the user limit to 10 because you can only have up to 10 people playing Among Us at the time of this recording. And then we can add in a parent, which is going to be the category document.category ID. This is the property of the actual object, which will be found inside the document thanks to our schema. And so this is going to be basically where to place the voice channel. Now the last thing we have to do when it comes to this is actually send an embed. So I'm going to go back up and I'm going to import something from require discord.js. Now this is the normal framework. This isn't going to be Commando. We can import message embed. Now at this stage, we can go back down and we can create a new message embed. So const embed equals new message embed. We could then chain some functions together, such as setAuthor. We're just going to take in two parameters. The first one is going to be the name. The second one is going to be an URL to the profile picture. Now, when it comes to the name, I want to use their nickname if possible. Otherwise, I'm going to use their display name, which should always be available. And I can do this with a member, which we previously destructured back up here on line 33. So member.nickname or member.displayname with a camel case notation, which means that the N is capitalized. So in case nickname doesn't exist or they don't have one set, then display name should always be there, and so we'll use that as a default. Now we'll add in a comma and a second argument, and this means that we are then going to add in a URL, which is going to point towards their profile picture. So we can say member.user.display avatar URL. And next we're going to add in a description to this. So set description, we can add in a template literal. We can then tag the member by just adding in member to the string, and then created a new Among Us game, join channel, and I'm going to add in quotes and then the channel name. I could then use add field. We're just going to take in two arguments. The first one is going to be the title. In this case, it is region, and we can just pass in the region that the user provided. And I want to add another field, which is going to be the game code. And this will also be the parameter that the user provided, which is just the code variable. Now we want to go ahead and send this embed throughout the channel. So I can say channel.send embed. And also, we don't actually need to create this new channel constant, so we can go ahead and delete this. Make sure you still keep the await. Now we can go ahead and save this. We can go into our console. We can run node index.js. I can then go back into my tutorial channel. I can run !au. We then want the region, let's just say US, and then the code, we can say test. So like I previously mentioned, at the time of recording, there's no public Among Us API, which means that there's no way for me to verify that what the user typed in is the actual game code. You could do some things like checking to see if it's 6 digits long, which I believe is how long the Among Us game codes are, but that's obviously simple to implement, so I'll leave that to you. But if we go ahead and run this, we then see this right here. So Alexander Flores created a new Among Us game, join channel Among Us test. And then we see the region and the game code. And we also see this right here. So now the last step is to make it so whenever users leave this channel, it'll automatically be deleted. So we can go back to our command and we can scroll all the way up. Within our constructor, we have access to the client, so we can actually add in some event listeners here. So I can say client.on, we want voice state update, which is whenever someone joins or leaves a certain voice channel. I believe this is called upon other types of voice state changes, but we only really care about whenever a user leaves a voice channel. So in this case, we have two parameters that we have access to, but we only need the first one, which is the old state. Now we can gain access to the channel, so I can destructure this, so const channel equals old state. And then we want to make sure that this channel actually exists, and if the channel is a Among Us channel, and if the channel is empty. If those three things are true, then we want to go ahead and delete this channel. So we can say if channel, and the reason for this is because whenever you're joining a channel for the first time, the old state's channel property is null. This is going to prevent some errors in our console. So if channel and channel.name.starts with, we can then pass in the channel name start, and channel.members.size is exactly equal to 0. So if all three of these things are true, that means that we want to actually delete this. So we can say channel.delete. However, in situations like this, I highly suggest you comment this out or don't type the code and then add in a console log to let us know what we're actually going to be deleting. So I can then add in a template literal and say deleting channel, add in the quotes, and then I can say channel.name. This is to make sure that we didn't have any logical errors and we're not going to be accidentally deleting any channels we don't want to. We can then save this, go back into our console, run our bot, go back into Discord, and then we can join Among Us test, and we can try leaving. And it's going to say deleting channel Among Us test, and so it doesn't actually delete it, but that's a good sign. We can then join here, and instead of leaving, we can then also join a different voice channel, and it's also going to say deleting channel Among Us test. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment this so it actually deletes it. You can keep the console log if you want. I'm going to save this and then restart the bot. I can then go in and I can join, and then I can leave. And because it detected that the channel is empty, it's going to automatically delete the channel. And so that's it for this video. Just a basic way to make it a little more organized for friends to actually play Among Us. This can be more useful when it comes to larger Discord servers, whenever you want to be more organized with how people play within those communities. Thanks for watching this Discord.js tutorial. If you want to learn more about Discord.js, consider clicking on the playlist you see on your screen now. If you need help, feel free to leave a comment or ask in the Worn Off Keys Discord, which can be found in the video description.